Timothy Jester, Chair, Commissioner DeWanna Wade, Commissioner Carol McCoy, and we also have Dr. Coleman here as our interim executive director, and Vivian Fox is our staff here helping. Thank you all. Metro Arts is, as always, here to drive an equitable and vibrant community through the arts, pursuant to the provisions of Code 2.68.030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws. Please take notice that decisions of the Arts Commission may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under common law writ of certiorari, and any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the Commission. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. All right, so with that, do we have any public comments today?
Yes, we have one public comment. We have Miss Ashley Batchelder, if you would like to come to the mic. Give me 2 seconds. All right, your time starts now.
All right. Good morning, everyone. MHRC sent a letter this morning outlining some of our feedback, considerations about all the decisions that will be made both here as well as in the full commission later. But I wanted to just highlight a couple of the things as they relate to the items on your agenda today for Thrive. We've expressed concern about removing nonprofit organizations and public art, community public art projects from the criteria. One thing that I want to point out is that my understanding of nonprofits being excluded from Thrive eligibility, the stated reason is that they can apply to operating grants, but my understanding is that is not actually true. When you look at your operating grant criteria, you have to be an art-specific organization. And so Thrive is available to non-arts organizations because they're not eligible for general operating grants. And so this is about equity in access for organizations that do not have access to arts funding for arts programming. I would really be disappointed if the commission made this change. And I also just think it opens the appearance of retaliation. We're still in an active Title VI complaint. We're in the monitoring phase, and some of the Title VI complainants would be disqualified from continuing to receive support and funding from Metro Arts. So I really want to warn against advancing that recommendation. And just in general, I don't know if making the criteria more narrow is because of the overwhelming number of applications, but I think that is an allocation problem and not so much a criteria problem. I think making criteria more narrow is the opposite of equity and has the opposite effect. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our public comments.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll move on to our action discussion items. So we are here again this morning, a week from last week when we talked about half of what we were going to talk about to discuss the Metro Arts Thrive Awards and their implementation, and we, if at all possible, need to leave the meeting today with a recommendation that we can make to the full commission meeting later today. So with that, I will turn the mic over to you, Dr. Coleman, and we can have some discussion around Thrive Awards.
Our grants manager and strategic initiatives manager, Sydney Davis, is ill with strep throat and other things, and her doctor has advised her not to be around people until she's more into her antibiotic regimen. We've already made the decision about, well, I guess a little context. Thrive, as you know, was designed for individual artists to receive funding. It has been in existence for approximately 14 years, and approximately 10 years, and ran into some problems in terms of using rules of procurement and other things to give money to individual artists, which was not in alignment with local or state regulations. Who's managing the PowerPoint next, please? This is just, well, go to Thrive, please. Sorry. One second. In last year, FY '23, there were two categories and a total of $178,000 $600 was awarded. In 23, in 24, it was not an allocation, but $908,000 was eventually awarded, and that was through supplementary payments from Metro government. So we made a fairly significant increase in Thrive funding. It is the belief of Metro Nashville art staff that we should not go backwards, and we just rounded it off and acknowledged $900,000, and that was recommended to go to the commission. Next, please. Those are just the discussions that we have already had, and that we have approved $900,000 to stay the same as before, and then we are hoping that this would be a beginning of increased funding for Thrive in the future, and the main thing is we don't want to go back. Next, please. We don't have to go through this because we're recommending that the panelists be approved. That criteria and some different things were that they are being paid $350, that they would also have to sign a conflict of interest statement. But the other thing that's important, rather than taking the 4 weeks for scoring that had been the case in the past, we're recommending that panelists score on site in 2 days for each category. So 2 days for Thrive and 2 days for operating. The reviews are the same as FY '23-24. And there was no additional criteria for scoring Thrive and operating. It's remaining the same. We are talking about Thrive, so we're going to go to the next slides. There's several that go to, here we go. Thrive Funding Program. As has been articulated by MHRC's representative, Ms. Batchelder, we gave consideration to arts collectives, that would be arts groups that do not hold a 501c3 status, or groups of individual artists. The rationale behind that was that we felt that if you were 501c3, you had options that others did not. Upon further consideration and discussions and review of the numbers that would be eliminated, we are asking that we want to reconsider that recognition and that recommendation, and not move it forward at this point. Next, please. We also had some funding guidelines, and the same point with muralists. They were a part of the group that received supplemental funding, and it was a lot of negotiation around that. Originally, the commission had excluded them, and then with the discussion and working out the terms of the conciliation agreement, they were included. We are asking that not be removed at this juncture. The other thing is this is a shortened grant period, so I guess the fewer changes we can make, the better, and these matters can be considered when we have a longer time frame. The second consideration is we have a finite amount of money, and the numbers of artists who are applying for Thrive grants is growing, and we're really considering that we want to spread this limited amount of money as broadly as possible, so we were suggesting one submission per applicant. We were trying to look at the numbers of what that would include and had not reached a conclusion because some people were in multiple categories and groups, and so we had not finished that. But we think it would be healthier and better and help us to move to a new direction if there's only one submission per applicant. Next, please. Another change is that we're asking for background checks for those who are involved in youth engaging projects. We did not see that as onerous, and the reason we did not see it as onerous is that it is a requirement of almost all youth-serving organizations, whether it's a church or a community group, that those who are involved have background checks. This would be the responsibility of the organization, and as many of them are already youth-serving organizations, there would not be any additional work that they had to do or money that they had to expend because they should already have the background checks. It's also just a question of risk management for Metro Arts and the city. We also wanted to give priority funding for underrepresented council districts. There are approximately 8 council districts that have not received any funding from Metro Arts programming. Another change which came out of the work of the working group that is associated with the conciliation agreement is the use of fiscal agents for payment. And it's a new mechanism. It's a mechanism that meets the state and local requirements. And that is, the specific terms are including a contract with Metro, a letter of agency, a letter of agreement between the artist and the fiscal agent, and a disbursement schedule so that there could be agreement on how the monies would be dispersed. We think this recommendation is a way that Thrive could go forward and that money could be given to individual artists. Next, please. And then the grant application timeline, we've already talked about the requirements for the fiscal agent, and I neglected to mention the grant spending plan. The other thing is that the applications that are currently in place are the ones that we would be reviewing. There are about 202 for Thrive and 7 for operating. So we do have a number of applications to review and to rank and to have the panel go over. Next, please. Okay, I want to stop there. What we are recommending in terms of funding for Thrive is that funding for all Thrive projects be capped at $10,000. And the reason for that is we just have a fixed amount of money and we want to spread the money as widely as possible. Other considerations are the merit of the application. And that's the major thing with regard to funding for Thrive that we are looking at. We have received a proposal from Ms. Batchelder, and unfortunately it wasn't on the agenda, so we can't discuss it, but it has merit, and it is something we will look at further. We've already talked about the fiscal agent, so if you could just go through those slides quickly. Go ahead. Okay, the recommendations to consider is that fiscal agents are the mechanism for which Thrive agents can be paid. We will be have begun developing a list of potential people for fiscal agents, and individual artists or individual arts organizations can select their own. Now, this is another one of those points that we have to take a decision on. Those who would like to serve as fiscal agents, we were recommended that they not be considered for Thrive Awards. There's a point of view that says, why should they be disqualified? Because they are doing a service, and actually it's a service that enhances our activities. And then the final recommendation is that it's a decision for the commission and this grants committee as to whether or not the fiscal agent should be disqualified from an operating grant, which is different from Thrive. So those are the recommendations that are to be considered. Next, please. Those are the justifications, the effort to comply, the effort to have some vetting done for the fiscal agents, maintaining fairness and objectivity. Next, please. And that's where we are with the fiscal agency. One of the proposals that we were looking at, let's go to award amounts, please. Okay, go to the next one, please, for Thrive. These are all operating. Okay, that's just, when we were looking at doing 24% of the ask, it showed up that $5,000 would be the flat funding amount, and then all others at 24, so long as they scored 70% or more. The first one has not received a lot of warm and fuzzy feelings because if everybody gets funding, or goes to the top 180, the amounts tend to be rather small, and $5,000 is a lot. We also have the reality is we're in December, and the grant funding will end in June, and it's going to take a minute, some weeks, for the money to go out once the criteria are approved. And what is the possibility, or can the money be spent in that length of time? So all of these are considerations that we are taking into account. And basically, we are recommending that if we use $10,000 as the top amount and then prorate it until the money is depleted. Next, please. Okay, well then that ends the discussion. And so there's several recommendations, and I'll turn it back over to the chair.
All right, that was a lot. So any questions or discussion from what we just heard?
I do have a question. Dr. Coleman, you mentioned that there were some suggestions in Ms. Batchelder's information sent this morning that would be taken into review. When will that happen, and how does that then potentially guide or affect what it is that we have to do here today?
Well, I think that if we stick with the $10,000 and look at the various proposals that we have, if we don't make a decision one way or the other, it doesn't matter what the proposal says. So I think it could inform the work that we've done, and it could also help clarify, because I think she did it at several levels, at 75%, 50%. We had done 50%. It just wasn't enough money to cover everybody at 50%. And so that's why that was rejected early on. So the answer is it has to be done immediately if we're going to consider it further. I don't know what kind of recommendation that this group can make to the commission, full commission, about that, but we would have to work on it like today and tomorrow and the weekend.
Thank you.
I know one of the concerns that Ms. Batchelder raised in her email was that the guidelines recommend 35% audits instead of the 10%. So what was the justification for a 35% audit and not just a 10% audit?
Well, we were just thinking about, given the number, and we have 200, so it would be about 60 that was manageable, but that's not a hard and fast. We just needed to do a sample. No matter what we do, we can't audit them all. So we did a sample, and it could be 10%. So that's something that we could.
So it would match operating.
So it could match and be consistent, yes.
Yeah. And I feel like the conversation that we were having before we had to, I'd say we lost quorum, but that's only fair after 3 hours of meeting. We were talking about the funding model, about the percent funding model versus flat funding model. And I think the last thing that we ended up talking about as the meeting ended was a $10,000 flat funding model that was prorated down a list of applications that scored 70% or higher. And it's my general understanding that if we were to talk about this particular funding method and potentially approve that, then along with a couple of changes from what we talked about before, then we can ask legal about it, but would have legal not approval, but they would sign off on it, and that MHRC would find it a viable option as well. So let's talk about the $10,000 flat funding model, and then funding applications 70 or higher, that score 70 or higher, down a list. Am I making sense in what I'm saying? Or have any questions or thoughts? So the idea is, instead of using the percent option we had before, or the flat 5,000, we discuss using a flat $10,000 model that all apps that score 70 or higher would be evaluated, eligible, and that anybody who asked for less than 10,000 would be funded at their full ask, that anybody who applied for more than 10,000 would be funded at 10,000, and then we would go down the list of grants until we ran out of funding money. And if I'm reading the room correctly, and I believe that would fulfill the requirements necessary, it wouldn't be less than 10,000. We would be scoring at 70 or higher, and so it's a funding mechanism that doesn't require difficult math. That is higher level than the $5,000 that was recommended before. It's not the 20,000, so it would go farther. And as long as we included some of the changes that Dr. Coleman expressed earlier, that it would be a feasible option that would make more people happy than the options we were talking about before.
And that process is what we were dancing a little bit on in the last meeting, right?
Yes.
At the end of the meeting.
Yes.
Which has, again, don't want to use the word approval, but has been reviewed by legal as a possibility that it would not have us out of bounds of what we need to be doing relative to the conciliation agreement and equity, et cetera.
Yeah, as Dr. Coleman discussed in his presentation, I think staff has decided to rescind their recommendations of the guidelines that not just MHRC, but I also opined were inequitable and did not provide a valid legal basis to regarding the $10,000 flat fee for anyone who scores 70% or higher. I can't speak to the financial part of that, but from a legal aspect, it's logical, it's based in policy. There's nothing arbitrary about that decision.
One other question, and this then allows us to apply last year's equitable distribution of funds based upon the criteria relative to Thrive. So the things that the panels went through, the community engagement conversations and things, overlaying all of what you just said, because I'm not going to try to restate it, but overlaying that as these decisions are made based upon the 70% or above, is still equitable relative to what the community engagement panels did and suggested previously.
If we include allowance of artist groups and 501c3s back into the mix, and we allow for community art projects and some of the things that were removed from the criteria last year, then I think that the answer is yes. The way it stood last week with not allowing 501c3s to be fiscal agents, or not allowing them to, I think if we had kept it the same as it was last week, then it wouldn't do that. But if we make those changes, yes.
Okay. So,
Go ahead.
how and who's going to state that as a votable motion?
So let me just make sure I have my ducks in a row here. So we're talking about allowing 501c3 organizations and artist collectives to apply for Thrive. That was one of the changes from last week. We're talking about allowing Thrive recipients to also be fiscal agents, which is a change from last week. And we're also talking about including community public art projects, which are changes from last week. So I just want to make sure before, I'm happy to make the motion, but before I make a motion that we've thoroughly discussed those, if we have questions about those 3 changes from last week.
Would you repeat those 3?
Yes, that we allow 501c3 organizations and artists collectives to be included as applicants for Thrive. That we allow Thrive recipients to also be fiscal agents. And that we allow community public art projects.
It would also be beneficial to state that this committee is approving the other staff recommendations of 1 submission per applicant, background checks for youth, priority funding for underrepresented council districts, and use of fiscal agents for any non-501c3 entities. Just to be clear on what this committee is recommending to the commission.
Yes. If I state that as approving other Metro Arts staff recommendations, is that sufficient?
Yes.
Okay. Thoughts, questions, commentary?
I have a question about the Thrive recipients serving as fiscal agents for themselves.
Yeah, it would not be for themselves. Is that specifically laid out? I don't.
So
That would
it would be, excuse me. It would be, I'm going to use a specific entity as an example. API of Middle Tennessee is a non-arts 501c3 who has received Thrive funding. Because they are a 501c3, they would not need a fiscal agent, and it would be that they would be allowed to serve as a fiscal agent for another Thrive recipient who is not a 501c3.
And legal says that that complies with the law.
Yes.
I have a question about that. And if there is supposed to be assurances that the money is handled properly, and you have now authorized a 501c3 that is not arts oriented. That's what I understand. They are not a 501c3 with its purpose of being arts oriented. Is that correct?
Correct. It's 501c3s whose primary mission is not an arts mission, but they have arts programming.
Okay. Okay.
All right. So I think I have all this down. I'm gonna make a motion. I'm gonna move that this committee recommends to the commission that we adopt Thrive Award criteria that include a $10,000 flat funding model, that all apps scoring 70 or higher will be eligible, that grants less than $10,000 will be funded at their ask, that grants who have applied for more than $10,000 will be funded at the $10,000 limit, that we allow 501c3 and artist collections to apply for Thrive, that we allow Thrive recipients to also be fiscal agents, that we allow community public art projects. I'm going to add one thing we didn't talk about so we can discuss it, and that we also allow for 10% audit limit to up to 10% audit limit to mirror operating grants. I believe with that,
Can you state that last part again?
that we mirror operating grants in allowing audit up to 10%, but not above 10%.
10%, okay, that's right.
10%. And I can repeat that if need be, but that's the motion that's on the table. Any discussion?
Yes. You said you would repeat it, and all I need is for you to go back to grants less than 10,000 are fully funded, and I think you then said 501c3 to apply for Thrive grants,
Yes, so grants less than, that who have applied for less than 10,000
fully funded.
would be funded at their full ask. Grants that applied for more than 10,000 will be funded at 10,000. That we would allow 501c3 organizations and artist collectives to be eligible to apply for Thrive. So with that, we have some discussion. Tessa?
Well, a second to the motion on the table, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Jester, would you mind amending your motion to also approve the other recommendations from staff?
You even said that already. So I'd like to amend my recommendation to also include approving the other Metro Arts staff recommendations.
Second.
We need to vote on the amendment.
Vote on the amendment?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
The amended motion is on the floor for discussion.
Now, I'd like to ask a few questions.
Sure.
Before we go to the meeting as a whole here in about an hour and a half, are we going to actually see this motion in writing?
We can make that happen. I
think
don't see
that-
why not.
I think that including everything that has been suggested, like amending the motion and including other recommendations from the staff, I have a lot of problems with what has happened in the last week, and that is a lack of clarity and receiving things from numerous sources yesterday and this morning. And there are some very questionable documents that I have looked at. One is the draft. There's a lot of undefined terms. And what is being done here is a rush to judgment type of thing that creates more problems down the line. That's why I want to see it in writing. I don't mind voting for it.
We have 2 hours for this meeting. Is there any reason we shouldn't type it up now, print it off, and distribute it to the committee?
I can make that happen.
So,
I call for the
w-
vote. I call for the vote.
I was going to get it printed off for you.
You said that.
All right, we'll call for the
Right
we'll
now.
call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you for getting that worked out, Tessa. All right, we're going to move on to conversation about fiscal agents. I think we've covered some of this, but are there any questions or thoughts or concerns about the fiscal agent model?
I just wanted to say that during the community engagement activities, several groups came forward who have the experience and expertise that we did not know about, to expressing their willingness to serve as a fiscal agent. It's going to require some orientation and we need to have more than 5 to 7, but that's what the working group had recommended, and so we're, I think we're about at 6, but still, now that we have defined what the expectations are and what their roles are, it was more general, and so that's going to require some orientation, and we're going to have to get on that quickly.
I know I received at least 2 emails of artists in the community who are not happy with the fiscal agent model. But two things to address that. Number one, I don't think we're in a position to argue with what came out of the working group. And two, there are very limited options that allow Thrive Awards to be funded in a manner that complies with Tennessee state law and Metro Code that don't involve fiscal agents. And so I just want to say to the emails that I got that were pushing back on that, I understand where you're coming from, and I think maybe the fight needs to continue to be fought. But in terms of a legal way of actually funding Thrive now, I think this is the best option that we have, fiscal agents.
And I think it's important to note that while there will be a list of probably more than 5 to 7 fiscal agents, awardees also are free to choose a fiscal agent from outside that list if they prefer, because that's what's in the document.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Yeah, so-
the recommended options that would make it the easiest, but if somebody had a different fiscal agent, they could use any fiscal agent that they could hire.
Right. I was just restating that it doesn't make, again, happiness is relative, but that is a note. Additionally, I have a question. So how many proposals or opportunities does a fiscal agent have to be a fiscal agent? So Organization X is approached by 4 Thrive awardees. Could they be the fiscal agent for 4 awardees? Is there a limit on that?
We have not discussed a limit in the working group or outside the working group. We are expecting that organizations will know their capacity, and we will do some vetting, but there's no number that has been established.
Also, it's my understanding that there have been some fiscal agents or people, organizations that had potentially be fiscal agents who had come forward and talked about potentially not charging at all. And so, I think that maybe the fiscal agent market would work itself out in that regard. People will go where they're going to be best suited by their fiscal agent. So limiting it seems like it might be counterintuitive to that.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that there should be. I'm just wanting to understand if there is or not.
There is not. And the other option with regard to fiscal agents that was rejected, we had looked at having one entity being the fiscal agent for everybody else, and we did not see that as affording Thrive applicants enough of their own agency or their own desire, so that was not moved forward.
Thanks.
Tessa, is there a motion necessary to recommend we don't need to recommend that to the commission, do we? Or do we?
Technically, use of fiscal agent was approved by the last motion. If there is policy that this body wants to set around fiscal agencies, such as limiting to 4, on the presentation it said 10%. If you want to recommend a cap at 6%, or any other policy that this body can mold related to the fiscal agency model, that would be what needs to be discussed and voted on.
Thank you. I don't see anything that needs to be discussed outside of what's been proposed as the fiscal agent model.
I do. Sorry. Go. Excuse me. Go ahead, Chancellor.
What is the artist authorizing official?
Can you tell me what document you're referring to?
It was included in the materials that were provided to us, and it is in the contract that is going to be signed by the fiscal agent. It says it's with the fiscal agent and the artist, but the artist isn't required to even sign the contract. But there is some word, authorizing official, the artist authorizing official. Who's that?
I know what she's talking about.
Are you speaking to the draft proposed fiscal agency letter of agreement?
I believe that's what it is.
Tessa, while you were looking it up, because I had the same question, and it is the person that the artist or arts organization designates.
In the Thrive organization? Okay, I think that does need to be clarified because that's not clear. And you actually have a contract in which the artist, who is a significant party, isn't even included in the signing of it.
So if the artist chooses a different person to be the communicator with the fiscal agent, this allows that. If the artist wants a legal
I wouldn't approve
representative,
a contract that if somebody is going to receive money, regardless of whether they have a fiscal agent or not, they need to be involved in a contract and sign it.
so I do want to provide some clarity on what is titled its letter of agreement. It went out to the commission with the naming of fiscal agency letter of agreement final draft. This is
Yesterday.
I understand that. This is an agreement that the working group developed as a template between the fiscal agent and the artist. Metro Arts and Metro cannot dictate the terms of that agreement between the artist and the fiscal agent. We will contract with the fiscal agent. So this is just a template draft that we are providing. The fiscal agent and the artist will have the autonomy to use this draft, modify this draft, come up with their own agreement. But this is something that the working group chose to put together and provide to this body and to the public because
Why send it to us?
why send it to you? For information, for transparency, because it outlines what the general relationship between the fiscal agent and artist.
So you're essentially telling us that here's a contract that the fiscal agent purportedly will have with the artist, but will not require the artist to sign it. That's what it looks like from the way that is structured. But you just want us to know that.
So our contract with the fiscal agent
I got that.
will require a letter of agreement between the artist and the fiscal agent. Whether or not they want this agreement, they want an agreement that's
I understand.
more or less.
I understand. You just put us on notice that we don't have anything to do with the artist and their fiscal agent's contract or their agreement. We don't need to see it. We aren't responsible for it. Is that right?
Legally an agreement between a party outside of Metro, correct. Metro will be contracted with the fiscal agent.
That's what I understand.
Okay. Do you have any other thoughts about that? I mean, I feel like we're leaving something hanging here. Just that you're not in agreement with it, or?
Having been through the audit process and asking for an audit a year and a half ago and the results that came out of it, one would think that as an entity, Metro Arts would have learned a big lesson about the importance of fiscal responsibility. That's my primary concern. And when I see something that is questionable, I'm going to raise it, and I think that's questionable. You have the opinion of Metro Finance, or excuse me, Metro Legal, that says that's not our concern until the audit comes. And then if there is mismanagement, what was our responsibility? And I hear we don't have any.
Metro always has financial responsibility when we give money to someone, whether it's a grant or the procurement process, and built into the contract that we will have with the fiscal agents will include that financial responsibility.
We're just giving the money through the fiscal agent.
Correct.
We're not giving it to an artist.
With the contract will state that there's an agreement for this money to go to an artist who had an approved project. And that is what this template draft letter of agreement states. And there's additionally a draft
And
fiscal
finance is
agency
also
letter.
signed off on this too, right?
Finance was part of the working group. These are documents that have came out of the working group.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item number 3, fiscal year 25 additional grant cycle items. And so I'm going to hand the mic back over to Dr. Coleman.
Thank you. What we had in mind with that is we've got to do a timeline working backwards from, because we have to go to council and get approval. We also have to do things like definitely identify the fiscal agents. We've got to train them. We've got to select the panelists. We've got to, the staff has to technically review the applications that we have, and then we have to have the panel members review them. So there's a lot of moving parts from now until actually getting the money into the hands of the artists. And we just wanted to highlight that. And our goal was January, but that is not realistic at this moment.
What do timelines look like for Thrive? Are they going to be able to mirror operating grants, or is it going to take a different amount of time?
No, we've been, that's been one of the major, I guess, not discussions, but orientations, that Thrive and operating should be in tandem, that one shouldn't be ahead of the other or one in back, that we're going to have to operate these simultaneously.
Is there anything, is there any part of Thrive that would keep it from operating as quickly as operating grants, or is it feasible that we operate them in tandem moving forward?
I'm not thinking of anything at this moment that would keep them from operating like that. The main thing is going to be the reviews by the panels, and since we've identified those for 2 days each, that's a lot better than the 4 weeks that had been the case before. Another thing that the working group has identified as being necessary is allowing 2 weeks to orient and train the applicants about their grants and the status of their grants, and by that time we would have completed the technical review, and then another 2 weeks for them to submit any adjustments. That's hopefully other things will be going on simultaneously, but that's a new element that was not initially conceived.
Okay. Any other questions around or discussion around additional grant cycle items? All right. Any new or old business that we need to discuss? Then I would accept a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Thanks, y'all.